When people discuss retro pre-3D wrestling games, the general consensus is that there is good games out there, but none containing the WWE license, or as it was called back then, the WWF. In general, this discussion doesn't include arcade games, or the handful released for home computer. Understandably so, the discussion is based on Nintendo and Sega hardware. I myself owned a few of these games as a kid, and though I did find enjoyment, it was clear that better wrestling games did exist. Pro wrestling on the original Nintendo has always been my preference when compared to the bucket of other options from that era. Acclaim had home console rights for the WWF brand very early on, releasing the first game to contain the WrestleMania license on the NES in 1989. Furthermore, they would retain rights to WWF Games on home consoles until WWF Attitude, which released 1 decade later. The most fascinating of the bunch is a quadrilogy of sorts that released during the 4th generation. Most folks don't realize how connected these games are, as the series is often bypassed due to its poor reputation, one that I don't feel is justly given, something this video will cover in depth. So which games are we covering? Super Wrestlemania, Royal Rumble, Rage in a Cage, and Raw. We're not going to cover WrestleMania, the arcade game, as I not only covered it in its own standalone video, but it's also in no way connected to these other games. So let's have a look at the games in question and discover which of these is the best. This is Retro Impressions. What is the best WWE game? 4th generation. First up is Super Wrestlemania. One thing which is present with this game and remains a constant throughout every release is a roster variation depending on the console you choose to play on. With Super Wrestlemania, the SNES version was developed first and contained Hogan, Savage, Million Dollar Man, Jake Roberts, Sid Justice, The Undertaker, and members of 2 tag teams, the Natural Disasters, Typhoon and Earthquake, along with the Legion of Dooms, Animal, and Hawk. If you choose to play the game, you'll have 3 modes to tackle: one-on-one, tag team, and the Survivor Series. If you're not familiar with the Survivor Series elimination match, it traditionally pitted 2 tag teams of 4 or 5 wrestlers against each other. The rules are similar to a tag team match, though all members of the opposing team must be pinned in order to claim victory. Beyond this one mode, there is really nothing special here, or any real substance to the game itself. Pick any mode, and win or lose, the game is over after 1 match. So scratch any sort of replayability you may have been hoping for. The SNES version is also notorious among fans of the series because no wrestler has any unique identifying feature to define them inside the ring outside of their look. No special moves, no unique skill sets, and no variation in how they control. They're all identical. Another oddity about this game is you can only climb on the top rope on the announcer side of the ring and only 1 wrestler at any given time. The Genesis version released around 8 months later, and a lot had changed. The game replaced nearly the entire lineup, only retaining Hogan, Savage, and the Million Dollar Man. New additions were the Ultimate Warrior, Shawn Michaels, IRS, the British Bulldog, and Papa Shango. If you're keeping track, that's 2 less than the SNES offered. As I stated before, a major disappointment with the SNES version was every mode was constrained to 1 match. Win or lose, you can only ask for a rematch or return to the main screen. The updated Genesis version adds a championship mode, allowing the player to pick a wrestler and take on the remaining roster in a quest for the title. It also added finishing moves for each wrestler, giving them a light distinction outside the visuals alone. Overall, both games received fair to positive reviews, and while they don't do anything special, they don't really have many flaws, outside a lack of features and generalized blandness. So what's the better version? Truth be told, I've always owned this on the Genesis and have always saw articles along with reviews placing it above the SNES due to the championship mode and added special moves for each wrestler. Personally, I don't think that trade-off is worth it though. The SNES has a slightly larger play area, larger sprite size, better graphics, objectively better sound, 2 more wrestlers, and it controls better due to the SNES not having a 3 action button limitation. So if we're comparing as most other people have, the SNES should have come out on top. Surprisingly though, there's something no one seems to mention, and that's the terrible frame rate present in the SNES release. It's this reason alone that the Genesis comes out on top. If a game is designed around 30 frames a second, and the game speed is directly connected to the frame rate, any uptick or downtick in this rate is going to impact the intended experience. For me, it's a massive and noticeable issue here, and I'm someone who can typically look past these things. I think nothing better illustrates the difference in gameplay experience due to the direct relationship of frame rate and game speed than a trip around the ring. Next up, WWF Royal Rumble. Now, before I get into the game, it's important to note that every game on this list is a continuation of development improving upon the base foundation from the original game. It's very similar to the incremental changes common with sports games of this era. These are expansions of the same idea and almost always a step forward, so I'll be notating the changes, though I won't be discussing some of the more minor mechanical adjustments between the releases. As with Super Wrestlemania, Royal Rumble first released on the Super Nintendo in June of '93. The menu has changed up a bit from the last release on the Genesis. The new championship mode is now referred to as Tournament and has been relocated under One-on-One. New modes include Brawl, which is a no-holds-bar match, Triple Tag Team, which is a tag team match, but with 3 on a team, and finally, the Royal Rumble replaces the Survivor Series match. In a Royal Rumble, a group of wrestlers draw numbers to determine their position of entry. The 1 and 2 positions start the match, with the next in line entering the ring every 2 minutes until no one is left. Elimination requires a wrestler to exit over the top rope and have both of their feet touch the floor. The representation in this game isn't exact, but it's close enough considering the constraints at hand. There are also new moves, though as with the previous game, these are all shared by the entire roster. All the wrestlers' finishers have been updated, but ultimately it's not far removed from Super Wrestlemania on the Genesis. The biggest in-ring addition is the introduction of illegal moves. We also see the first weapon the series would receive, the iconic chair. Fundamentally, not much has changed to set the wrestlers apart. They all move with the same speed, have the same stats, and feature nothing defining in the way each one controls. With Super Wrestlemania, the user had access to 3 difficulties. From this game forward, it's been adjusted to 10. The final thing of note is the new grappling meter. I think it's fair to say it doesn't change anything from the prior game, but gives a visual representation of the tug-of-war system the developers chose to implement through the entirety of the 4th generation of WWF game releases. So about this tug-of-war system, we should discuss it for a minute, as it seems to be a rather large area of contention and sticking point for those who dislike the game. Acclaim's WWE Quadrilogy has 2 basic mechanics. You can think of the basic game as what you might anticipate with a traditional brawler. However, that doesn't make it a wrestling game. To do that, they included a grappling mechanic where the winner is decided by how fast they press a button. There are a number of different moves, and it seems to me that the easier, less damaging attacks move the meter with less button presses versus the more difficult ones. So it's really the player's responsibility to figure out a strategy fitting to their ability and when it's best to take the risk of pulling off a more demanding maneuver. I'm not positive this is the case, but the more I play through this series of games, the more I'm convinced that's how the system functions. It's a concept not too dissimilar to early Mario Party series minigames or the N64 classic Track and Field 2000. Quite frankly, it works well, but if this style of gameplay is not your thing, nothing the series does will change your mind. The Genesis version released a few months later, with the only noticeable change being to the roster. Wrestlers appearing in both versions are Bret Hart, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Macho Man Randy Savage, Razor Ramon, Crush, and Lex Luger under the name The Narcissist. Exclusive to the SNES is Tatanka, Yokozuna, Million Dollar Man, Mr. Perfect, and Ric Flair. The Genesis replaces them with Hulk Hogan, IRS, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, the model Rick Martel, and Papa Shango. It's also the first game in the series to introduce compatibility with the 6-button gamepad, and oddly, the only version of this game to make use of the mode button. It's utilized during the 3-person tag team match, where it changes the person waiting to be tagged in on your team. The visuals have been updated, and it's a huge step forward for the series, but when comparing the 2 versions, the SNES still has the Genesis beat. More good news for both system owners is that the frame rate is consistent this time between both games, making the experience fairly close to identical. So what version is best here? It's nearly a toss-up based on the roster you most prefer, but I still give the edge by a hair to the SNES due to its still superior audio presentation. The next release in the series was Rage in a Cage. Not only was this a Sega CD exclusive, but it's also the only wrestling game available on the system, making it the best wrestling game on the Sega CD. I think that's all that really needs to be said.
Then allow my actions to speak louder than my words.
Oh, you want to hear what makes it unique? Okay. The game boasts a massive roster of 20 wrestlers, the most in a WWF game up to this point, and that would remain the case until the release of Acclaim's final WWF game in '99, Attitude for the PSX, N64, and Dreamcast. This game also features multiple tag team wrestlers. It would seem like the ultimate version, if not for one massive omission. All tag team modes have been removed. In fact, there is no Survivor Series or Royal Rumble either. In return, we're giving a new steel cage match, but it's not a great mode and hardly justifies the removal of the prior content. Overall, it's a step forward in the single player department and a step backward if you enjoy the other modes, making it a step in the wrong direction overall. Being on the Sega CD, it contains the usual stuff you would expect of an early system release, such as highly compressed video and some upgrades in the sound and commentary department. The new features here are mostly ones that wouldn't move forward and could be considered experimental at best. That brings us to WWF Raw. It first released in 1994, and unlike the other multi-platform releases, the Genesis and SNES were developed side by side, releasing on the same day. In addition, this is the only release in the quadrilogy to see an appearance on the Game Boy and Game Gear. The game was also ported to the 32X in 1995, the latter three which we will discuss more in depth as we get into the breakdown segment. Strictly speaking of the SNES and Genesis versions, they are packed full of content, but the most significant addition to the series is unique stats for every wrestler. Speed, size, stamina, and strength are all now a factor in how each one controls. Each wrestler also has an added finishing move, making it 2 in total. The roster is made up of 1-2-3 Kid, Bam Bam Bigelow, Diesel, Doink the Clown, Bret the Hitman Hart, Owen Hart, Lex Luger, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, Undertaker, Yokozuna, and the only female wrestler to appear in a WWF game up to this point, Luna Vachon. Of course, this isn't the first game with a female wrestler. In 1990, a game called Cutie Suzuki No Ringside Angel released on the Mega Drive, which featured a full female cast. Surprising to many is that this game not only exists, but is also based on the real female wrestler Cutie Suzuki, who shares her namesake with the game. A nifty tidbit about the development of Raw and Luna Vachon is storyline-wise, she was the girlfriend of Bam Bam Bigelow. She was well known for being the first successful non-diva style female wrestler, paving the way for others such as Chyna. At the time, this prompted serious consideration to include her during the first release in the series, Super Wrestlemania. Ultimately, the idea was scrapped over concerns of blowback by releasing a game that allowed a man to fight a woman. As Raw entered development, Luna and Bigelow were part of a storyline that saw mixed-sex couples battling outside of the ring. Most likely, this is a clue as to why Luna was finally included 3 games past her intended video game debut, and why the remaining Diva classified wrestlers remained on the sidelines. Getting back to the game itself, added features include support for 4 players and several added modes, making it the richest offering in the series by a country mile. Ultimately, each release in the series is like purchasing an expansion pack for the original that enhances the experience every time, with the only real shortfall being a rotating roster that might not always be as appealing as the prior offering. So if Raw is a completed version nearly 2.5 years in the making, what version of Raw is the definitive release? Let's get into the breakdown. First up is sound. Through most of the series, the SNES has clearly maintained the advantage, the only exception being the Sega CD exclusive, which is a healthy upgrade overall. So, does the status quo remain true with Raw? Of course it does. This is an Acclaim game after all. For the most part, the sound team failed to utilize the Mega Drive hardware properly, and the result is rather hollow when playing the Mega Drive release. Music aside, both are fairly on par when it comes to the remaining effects, but the SNES still maintains an edge due to its better utilization of the samples present. I think the best example is the crowd itself. Thankfully, the 32X is capable of improving the experience where the Genesis falls short. Crowd noise aside, did the team responsible for this version step it up enough to take the top spot? Well, it's a vast improvement over the Genesis and has a much more vibrant and fuller audio presentation when compared directly to the SNES. Overall, the quality is noticeably better, and there's a small increase in the audio samples present. It's not a big improvement, but it's enough to take the top spot. The real unfortunate bit across all the versions is that there's a clear lack of sound effects where you might anticipate them. Sometimes they're there and sometimes not. It's something I wouldn't expect considering there's no music during matches, leaving plenty of audio channels open to execute everything required. required. There's not much else to say, so I'll leave you with a few examples. Next up is visuals. As always, we are going to compare sprites across all versions, sorting them in order of size. I've included all the games in the series to give you the best idea possible of the progression being made from start to finish. Feel free to pause the video and take an educated guess as to what versions are where. Visually, Raw is clearly the best of the quadrilogy, but like all versions before it, it's not perfect. I think it's important to notate what Raw does right and what it does wrong. Most of the wrestlers are easily identifiable, especially when standing alone. I say standing alone because when they're next to each other, things can get confusing. Here's Kevin Nash standing next to another wrestler. If you're familiar with that era, you might be wondering who this other wrestler is. After all, Kevin Nash is 7 foot tall and really stood out due in part to his height. So let me shock you by revealing that this is the 6 foot tall 1-2-3 Kid. Another comparison is Kevin Nash to Luna Vachon. She's only 5'5" after all. Yeah, it's the same deal. So every single wrestler in the game is the identical height. A rather massive disappointment in the visual department that leads to a questionable in-game representation of the roster. Honestly, it's not a new issue, it's been a problem through the entire series. Speaking of rank, the fight for the bottom spot is a little clearer than the one for the top position. Essentially, the SNES and Genesis both give a clean presentation that's fitting of each platform. There really isn't any significant difference that doesn't come down to personal preference, with one exception. The Genesis version seems to once again run at a higher frame rate, and this time around it doesn't affect gameplay, but it's visually notable. This higher frame rate isn't just a step up over the SNES, it's also a step up over the 32X, as both the 32X and SNES appear to be utilizing the same lower frame rate setting. Speaking of the 32X, I found it interesting that this release fully upended the front-end presentation. It's almost like it was intended as a new game when only considering the menus. One thing you might have noticed is the smaller sprite size on the 32X version. It's a bit deceptive though, because the framing of the ring has been slightly changed, giving the player a wider perspective of the overall action. With the new ring included, I wondered if we had lost real estate compared to the other two versions, so I did a test counting the frames of animation required for a wrestler to cross the ring in each release, and it's identical across the board. One thing Raw introduced was recognizable ringside announcers. Common across all games is Jerry the King Lawler, and who I believe to be Jim Ross. Exclusive to the 32X is a second set of announcers, one being Gorilla Monsoon, and the other who I believe to be the Fabulous Moolah. If you think I'm wrong, let me know who you think this is. I asked a few people and we couldn't reach a consensus on this. The 32X also has more than one referee, so overall there's a slightly lower frame rate, but the graphical overhaul makes it really stand out. So on top is the 32X, then the Genesis, and at the bottom, the Super Nintendo. It's time to look at controls and gameplay. We've already discussed the elephant in the room regarding the tug-of-war mechanic. Placing that aside, I can't see another reason a person could legitimately complain about here unless they are comparing these games to ones of a much later era. I never had an issue executing the moves I wanted in the manner I wanted, and thanks to the difficulty meter of 1 to 10, I could find a sweet spot to ensure the game was fair and balanced for my personal capabilities. This remains true across all versions. I really don't have anything contrary to say, as the developer did a really great job of executing their vision and it works as intended. With that said, there's no separation between them, so this segment is a draw. Next up is extras. Well, there's not much to distinguish the SNES and Mega Drive release, so they are tied for second. Even if you don't feel that's fair, there needs to be a baseline, and this is it. Neither game offers anything unique over the other, making this a wash. In first is the 32X. The biggest addition is the hidden character Quang. He's not a complete package as he borrows his finishers from other wrestlers, though on the flip side, he does have his own music and is a nice addition to the roster. There are also the additions mentioned in the visual section, which I won't rehash here. It may not sound like a lot, but enough to clearly distance the 32X from the others. Next up, handhelds. I never played Raw on a handheld before this video, but had played Steel Cage Challenge, which released on the NES in '92, then the Game Gear and Master System in '93. It's a game that's quite serviceable considering the platforms. In my opinion, picking up a game developed a couple years later for the same platform should, at minimum, maintain the status quo. Unfortunately, the experience delivered is rather shocking as both the Game Gear and Game Boy release don't pass muster for what I would even consider a favorable tech demo. They're uninspired visually and painfully slow in the gameplay department. The Game Gear only has a couple wrestling games to start with, and this is clearly the worst of them all. The Game Boy version is just as bad. There's no winner here, so just move along as better wrestling games exist, and when I say better, I mean these are both bad games, so the bar is set low. It's time for my final recommendations. We're going to change things up a bit here and include all games in the quadrilogy, though for Super WrestleMania and Royal Rumble, I'll only be including the best versions of those releases. So is Super WrestleMania on Mega Drive or Rage in the Cage on Sega CD the worst game of the bunch? When it comes to Super WrestleMania, there's nothing really wrong with it. It's a game I played in my youth, having put in hundreds of hours over the years. Unfortunately, it's a bit shallow in the features department. We need to answer the question, is it more shallow than the Sega CD release? Well, Rage in a Cage has a massive roster and improved audio, which doesn't lean on the Red Book format, both welcome additions in my mind. The biggest hangup is a lack of acceptable baseline modes. It's the third release in the series, but in some ways gives the player fewer options than Super WrestleMania. There's no tag team or Survivor Series here, making it quite the disappointment once you dive in because it's so darn close to being something special. The added roster doesn't mean much when there are few things to do with the given wrestlers. The added cage match is poorly executed as well, so Rage in a Cage comes in at 6th, while Super WrestleMania on Genesis comes in 5th. In 4th is Royal Rumble on the Super Nintendo. It's essentially an expansion of Super WrestleMania, which offers its own unique and quality modes. There's not much to say that hasn't already been covered, and clearly the ranking at this point is what you most likely were anticipating. Determining the outcome of the battle for the top 3 spots is interesting as one thing becomes clear. Any version of Raw is preferable to any other game in the quadrilogy. Just get the version that's most accessible to you because the line that separates them, especially the Genesis and SNES, is really only visible when playing these games back to back to back. The Mega Drive takes second with the SNES in third. The Genesis' smoother animation and slightly better frame rate is the deciding factor here. Overall, the development of both versions was really well done, and for all intents and purposes, they're nearly indistinguishable. With that, the 32X takes the top spot. One new wrestler, a welcome upgrade in the visual presentation, and the best audio of the series makes this game a winner. If you absolutely demand a step up in frame rate, then the Genesis is the version you should obtain without question. For everyone else, this shortfall is so mild, anyone not analyzing each game back to back to back would be hard-pressed to notice. In the end, one thing is clear. WWF Raw isn't just the best WWF game on a 4th generation console, it's one of the best wrestling games of that era. A game that's unfairly dismissed without any real merit. If you're looking for a fighting game with wrestlers in it, go ahead and pick up WWF Wrestlemania, the arcade game. However, if you're looking for a wrestling game featuring icons of that era, which attempt to emulate the TV experience, then this is it. That's it for this episode, and as always, thank you for watching Retro Impressions.